Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, Pop Retro. Pop Retro 1 on Instagram and Twitter, facebook.com/popretro1. That's where you can find me on social media if you want to check it out. Just wanted to pop in here for a couple minutes to share with you a book that I have just reread for the first time in, just about 30 years. I read it in high school the very first time I read it, and that is Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho by Stephen Rebello. This was published in 1990, and this was one of the first books that I read. I was a freshman in high school in 1990, and this was one of the first books on film that I read. I think I may have read it a couple of years later, and this is not my childhood copy of the book. I think I checked it out at the library, at the school library back then. But it was just one of those books that that made me really want to read more about film and learn more about film, and just it shared so much information, insider info and making of info, that was just one of those books that if you read it at a certain age like I did, it really gave you an appreciation and a lot more knowledge about what goes into making a movie, and in fact making one of the great movies from one of the great directors like Hitchcock. Psycho, I would say, was a gateway for me and probably a lot of other 80s kids to horror movies. And by that I mean, in the 80s growing up, the big franchises like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween. Often I remember you would see Psycho be mentioned alongside those, or even airing on cable TV when they were airing, various reruns of horror movies from the 80s. Psycho would sneak in there too. And probably some of that had to do with the later sequels that had come out as well. But I remember seeing Psycho, or feeling like Psycho was just one of those classic horror movies, along with, A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Halloween, even though this one predated those movies by, it was 1960, so by so many years. But it kind of didn't matter. And another thing was, I want to say late 80s, Alfred Hitchcock Presents aired in reruns on TV. So between Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Psycho, I felt like that was my introduction, I suppose, to Alfred Hitchcock. I didn't see a lot of the other movies that he made, a lot of the other, more sought after films, classics, until I was a little bit older. And so that's when I realized that he was more than just Psycho and The Birds. He really was a director of a lot of thrillers that inspired, and dramas that inspired, so many filmmakers and people in the industry. So what was interesting about this book, well, all of it was interesting, but one of the main takeaways for me back then, as well as today still, was how Hitchcock really wasn't too keen on this movie Psycho. And by that I mean, I just mentioned watching reruns of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which to me, when I was 13 years old, was like, another Twilight Zone, basically, just an anthology. But I found it interesting that he actually used his TV crew to shoot Psycho. And he used his own money to fund the production because the studio didn't want anything to do with it. And he wanted to make it as quickly and cheaply as possible. And so he literally said, all right, I will buy the rights and I want to make this my, quote, 30-day picture. And so he was using TV techniques in a lot of ways to try to quickly and cheaply spit out this film and get it out there without paying an arm and a leg, because a lot of people didn't believe in such a such a horror tinged movie. It was really wild at the time, obviously. That's why it was so influential over the years. The beginning of the book, it gives a nice overview of the Ed Gein, Gein. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but Ed Gein. He was the guy who the original book by Robert Bloch, Psycho, was about. It was about the real life killings, or inspired by the real life killings of this guy Ed Gein. And it does give an overview of the novel that inspired the film too. And then it, of course, dives into the intricacies of the production, the deal making, all the struggles, the shooting, post-production, publicity. Everything gets a chapter in this book. And it was really cool to read again after all these years, because it really did a nice job of breaking down each step of the process, from the kernel of the idea and the real life happenings that inspired it, clear to the end, where the movie was released, and the reception that it got, and even a chapter on its what do you call it, afterglow and aftermath, at least as it was seen in 1990 when this book was published. And so all still relevant today. I felt as reading this. And another interesting thing too, as far as aftermath and afterglow, is that in 2012, Fox Searchlight released the movie Hitchcock, which starred Anthony Hopkins as Hitchcock and Helen Mirren as his wife, Alma. Scarlett Johansson played Janet Leigh. And what's interesting about that movie was that it's actually based on, it's about those years, the making of Psycho during the years that was taking place. And it's actually based on this book. So 22 years later, Stephen Rebello, the author of this 1990 book, actually has a writing credit, and I assume royalties as well, for being able to adapt his real life account into this biographical, Hollywoodized version of the story of how Psycho was made, and Hitchcock and his life and what was going on during that time. So I would suggest reading the book by Stephen Rebello if you can get your hands on it. You probably find a used copy somewhere, and there has also been re-releases in paperback that you can find as well. I saw those online, and this was an original 1990 copy. You can kind of see it's pretty worn. And there's a look at the back. And it goes for, 224 pages. That includes the index and filmography. There's about 202 pages of content, of the actual content that as far as the story of the making of Hitchcock goes. So, you can, if you're a reader, you can definitely sit down and read this in, a couple sittings if you're really into it. So it's not too long, not over long. So anyhow, I thought that also that just as a young teenager, when I first read this, it covered a lot of the things that you would later learn about Hitchcock once you studied him more and watched more of his movies later on in life. At least that's how it worked out for me. And so a lot of the things that became Hitchcock staples, a lot of his quirks and things that he liked to do, his jibing of the press and playing games with the people in charge at the studios, all of that he did during the creation of Psycho. And you can see how it really just mirrors his entire career, from his earliest silent films when he was, kind of showing these tendencies early on, to, clear up to Psycho, and later when he kind of had it down, how to deal with making a picture, how to deal with the studios, how to deal with the press and everything else. And it's all pretty well documented in Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, published in 1990 by Stephen Rebello. So there you go. Just wanted to pop in. I reread this about 3 months ago, so I wanted to get on here and get it down on video before too many of the details disappeared from my brain again. So I just wanted to share this with you and let you know that it's out there if you've never read it and are interested. So thanks for tuning in, and I will be back soon with another haul video and some Blu-ray/movie reviews, and I'll see you then.